Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Bill, for inviting me. Bill sent me a text a few weeks ago and invited me here, so I'm glad to be here. My name's Roy Hooser, and I'm a grateful alcoholic. My sobriety date's March 15th, 1972. I have a home group. It's a 3 legacy group. We meet on Monday night. I have a sponsor. I don't think I've been without a sponsor over a couple of days the whole time I've been sober. I try to get a sponsor as quickly as I can. And I'm on my 6th sponsor right now. The first 5 are deceased. But every one of these men have contributed to my sobriety. Every one of them guided my life, directed my life, molded my character. I'm a product of sponsorship. Now, there are a couple of guys in my sponsors, a couple of my sponsors that were really important in my life. One was a guy named Bryant Bivens, and Bryant was my sponsor for over 20 years. And the other one was a fellow by the name of Tom Ivester. Tom was my sponsor the last 18 years of my life, of his life. These 2 men contributed probably more than my parents did to my character. Bryant told me, burned into my brain really, that I must continue to change. He said, it doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've been sober, you must continue to change if you want to continue to receive the fruits of this fellowship. I heard that and I was sick of it, but I understood what he was saying. I've been sober over 51 years. My personal experience has proven to me that every time I've given up old ideas, my life is always better than it was before. So I embrace change. I look for ways to change. I want my life to be better. A few years ago, I started a concerted effort to cease fighting anything or anybody. Now, I'm not perfect at it. I still, when a man cuts me off in traffic, I immediately revert back to my old ways of anger. But the second thought that comes around is that, Roy, you can't afford that. That's not something you want to do. And so I simply say, God, he must be in a hurry, so take care of him, keep him safe. It stood me well. A couple of things that have resulted from that is my resentment level's gone to almost nothing because I walk away from conflict. I'm not going to get involved in it. I'd rather be happy than right. And life has been too good to me to get involved in something like that. So the second thing I do is every night before I go to bed, I review my day. And I share my daily inventory with 7 other guys. We do it with group text. One of the fellows is in Arizona, one of them's in Missouri, 3 of the guys are in Texas, 2 are in Tennessee, and I'm in North Carolina. And every night before I go to sleep, I ask myself, have I been selfish or dishonest today? And if I was, what did I do about it at the time? And did I have resentments or fears? Did I do something today that required an amend? And did I make that amend immediately, as the book says? If not, is it on the agenda for first thing in the morning? And then I turn my thoughts to somebody I can help. Now, I sponsor a lot of guys, so I can come up with a name pretty quickly on somebody I can help. I put this into a text and I send it out to 7 other men. And they send me their daily inventory. And I've learned a lot of ways I can change my life by reading how the other men live their daily life. I'll give you an example. One of the guys said he was at a discussion meeting, and rather than listen to what somebody was saying, he was trying to put together what he was going to say when he got his turn. And I said, hell, I do that. So I quit. And today I listen to what you have to say, and I leave it up to God to put into my mouth what he wants you to hear. And it consequently has worked a whole lot better. The second thing that comes from that is that I have to watch my behavior throughout the day. because the night before I go to bed, I have to be accountable to 7 other men. It's an amazing thing. Now, Tom Ivester was probably the most inspirational human being I ever met in my life. He's a guy that got sober in penitentiary, later became warden twice, as unheard of, absolutely unheard of. He was sober 65 years when he died last September. Tom inspired me every day I was with him, every time I was with him. He's a remarkable human being. He was known all over the world. I don't care where I go in this country, when people find out I'm from North Carolina, somebody will ask me if I know Tom I. When I tell them I do, they begin to tell me how he changed their life. Remarkable. Traveling with him at a convention or a conference is a chore. It takes an hour and a half to cross a hotel lobby with people coming up, shaking his hand, introducing themselves, and remarkable. I loved him, and God knows I'll miss him every day of my life. My sponsor today, I've known for a long time. His name is Bill C. He's got 50 years sobriety, 56 years sobriety. I had my first drink when I was 16 years old, sitting in a car with 2 friends. Both those guys ordered Miller High Life, and so I ordered a Miller High Life. And the reason I ordered Miller High Life is I didn't know any other brands. I came from a family that didn't drink. They told us it was bad for us, and I knew nothing about drinking. I sat in that car and drank beer with those guys that night, and 2 things happened to me. One, for the first time in my life, I felt a part of. I had been on the outside looking in all my life, never fit anywhere I was. And that night I was part of the world. I was part of those 2 guys' life. I was part of everything. And the second thing that happened to me that night, and I think probably it was subconsciously, but I realized that alcohol was my solution. It made all the bad vibes go away. And as our book says, I pursued it almost to the gates of insanity or death. Now, my wife and I ran off and got married when we were in high school. I was a senior, she was a junior. She says we both came in heat same time. That's probably true. That's probably closer to the truth than either one of us realized. But I graduated from high school that year, and my wife went back to school the next year as a senior and graduated, and I signed her report cards. I never let her forget it. And she says that that's the last time I had any control in that house. And that's probably true. This past February, we celebrated 68 years of marriage. And that's the first miracle of my life. This lady should have been gone years ago, but she stayed, and I'm grateful. I went to college after I got out of service. And after I got out of college, I started a 45 or 50-year career in sales. If I had to live my life over again, I would pick the same occupation I did this time, because I think I enjoyed every day of it. One of the first jobs I had, I sold school buses. I was regional manager for a company here in town, and I worked 21 states. I had sales reps and manufacturers reps and distributors everywhere I went. And I was gone all the time. I left on Monday real early, and I came home late on Friday night, unless I happened to be on the West Coast, and then I stayed out over the weekend. Sometimes I'd be gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time. In the 60s, it was in the 60s, and the 60s were a drinking society. It was a time of the 3 martini lunch, the happy hour that started at 4 and lasts till 7. And I not only became a daily drinker, I became an all-day daily drinker. I drank from the time I got up till the time I went to bed. And every Friday night I came home, I was drunk. And I was drunk over the weekend, and there was always trouble. And every Monday morning on the way to the airport, I would promise myself that this week I'm not going to drink. I'm going to stay sober all week. I'm going to go home Friday night sober. I'm going to be sober over the weekend. I'm going to be a husband and a father and a friend and a neighbor. And I'm not going to do the things that I did last weekend. And I meant it. It's what I wanted to do. I remember sitting in an airplane seat at 7:30 in the morning, looking at 2 drinks on the tray in front of me and realizing for the first time in my life, I could not drink. I was 30 years old and I was hooked. I had spent the previous hour promising myself that this week I'm not going to drink. And here I am with 2 drinks on the tray. And I realized I couldn't even keep a promise to myself. And the next emotion it comes around is, what the hell's the use? The cycle would start again. One of the first things I related to in the book Alcoholics Anonymous was when was a passage that says we're on a merry-go-round and can't get off. When I read that, I knew exactly what it meant and what it said. In 1968, the vice president of a competitive bus manufacturer who knew my sales and management skills, but didn't know anything at all about my drinking, said, Roy, what would it take to get you to go to work for us? And I named the price and he hired me. Now, this company was out of Arkansas. They had an assembly plant in Texas. They were building an assembly plant in Pennsylvania, and they hired me to be sales manager of the Pennsylvania operation. And we moved to Pennsylvania and nothing changed. Same thing, drunk, creating problems, embarrassing myself, my wife, my family. It's just nothing changed. One of the first guys I met up there when we moved to Pennsylvania was a man by the name of Ned Hunter. And Ned was the general manager of a company that sold our buses over in Southwest Pennsylvania. I went down the first time I met him and spent the morning with him, and we went to lunch at 12. And the girl came around and said, what do you guys want to drink? I said, I'll have a martini. And Ned said, I'll have an iced tea. And I thought, here's a guy who don't drink at lunch. I had no longer been associating with people who didn't drink at breakfast. But here he didn't drink in the morning. And I figured he probably just didn't drink when he's working. Subsequent trips, he never took a drink. I was down there one day and I happened to mention that there was a big convention in Philadelphia the next weekend. And I said, Ned, I'm gonna go down a day early and set up a hospitality suite. And Ned said, would you like me to go along to 10 bar? And I said, sure, come on. He came to Philadelphia that weekend. He spent time pouring booze. He stayed up at 2 o'clock in the morning. He told stories. He laughed. He had more fun than anybody there and never took a drink. Somebody told me during that time, that weekend, that Ned used to drink, but he no longer drinks. And that's all I knew. A few months later, he and I on a plane going down to Little Rock, their home office, and we're flying along, and the girl comes by with the drink cart, stops at our row, and she says, what do you guys want to drink? And I said, I want a bourbon and ginger ale. And Ned said, I want a bourbon and ginger ale. Well, this caught my attention. I'd known him for a little over a year. Never known him to take a drink. He was ordering booze. But it was the little miniature bottles. And when this girl set it down on the tray, he took the booze, moved it over to my tray. Said, here, Roy, you drink the bourbon and I'll just drink the ginger ale. And I said, Ned, you don't drink at all, do you? Now, this man had read the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. He had read the chapter, Working with Others. And when I opened the door, he stuck his foot in. I got a 12-step call at 30,000 feet. Never said a word to me about my drinking. He told me what happened to him. He told me about losing a family and a fortune and a business. And he ended the conversation by saying, Roy, I belong to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I haven't had a drink in 5 years. Now, I didn't know Alcoholics Anonymous from a Rotary Club, but I knew that information was important. I knew subconsciously, I knew that was important in my life. Now, it was shortly thereafter that I got fired. I'll give you a little piece of advice. Don't ever work for anybody from Arkansas. They're backwards, they're narrow-minded. If you don't work, they won't pay you. And all I was doing was drinking, so they fired me. And we moved back to North Carolina, and I went and visited my brother-in-law. It was a small company, and it was barely able to support one family. We couldn't support two, and so I didn't stay long. Sometime in November of 1970, I came to laying on the floor. My belly was saying, why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? And I didn't know what I'd done last night. I just knew it was bad. I was full of guilt, remorse, and shame, and I knew last night was bad, but I couldn't come up with any details. But I remember Ned Hunter, and I called him on the phone, and I remember saying, Ned, I think I have a drinking problem. Ned burst out laughing, and he said, Roy, everybody that's ever known you knows you have a drinking problem. And we're all thrilled to death that you finally found it out. And we began to talk. And at the end of that conversation, Ned said, Roy, call Alcoholics Anonymous and do what they tell you to do. Now that, I didn't know at the time, that's the secret to life to the drunk. Now, before I go any further, let me say this. Once I got sober, I stayed in touch with Ned. And the last time I talked to him was on a Christmas Eve. And when I got hung up, I told my wife, I said, he sounds like he's drunk. And I couldn't find him after that. So I had some friends up in Pittsburgh area, and I called them and asked them if they would check out and see what happened. And they reported back that Ned had 10 or 12 years sobriety and he got drunk. And he was in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was drinking and come back and drinking and come back. And he was now deceased. They didn't know whether he was drunk or sober when he died, and they did not know the cause of his death. But I'm going to tell you this much. Ned didn't make it. But I will always be grateful to that man. He started the process that saved my life. He made the first step, 12-step call on me. He directed me into Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll always be grateful to him. I called Alcoholics Anonymous that morning, and they sent a man out to see me. And I went to my first AA meeting sometime in November 1970. I had been in AA about 15 minutes when I knew I was on. I knew that's where I belonged. I liked AA from the very beginning. Now, there were two parts of this program I couldn't buy right off the bat. One was that God part, and the other was that not drinking. Now, if you leave God and not drinking out of AA, there's no whole lot left but coffee. And needless to say, I had a lot of trouble. For the next 16 months, the only thing I did worthwhile was return to Alcoholics Anonymous after every major drunk. On March 15, 1972, I came to laying on the floor. My belly was once more saying, why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? And I knew what I'd done last night, and I didn't want to think about it. I was 35 years old, and I knew my life was over. I was unemployed and unemployable. My wife was talking to a divorce attorney. My kids were ashamed of me. I didn't know of a single person in the world I could call on for help, and I didn't believe in God. We have a passage in our book that says, deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. And because that's true, and only because that's true, I called out to a God I didn't believe in. I simply said, God, if there's a God, I need help. In the next few minutes, everything about me changed. My whole life changed. My personality changed. I was suddenly enveloped in the greatest feeling of peace and serenity I've ever known in my life, like I was wrapped in a warm blanket. I knew that morning there was a God, there always had been. It was me that was wrong. I fully accepted the fact that morning that I was alcoholic and knew I had been for years. Never been any doubt in my mind since then. I knew that morning that the problems I had that day, and somehow knew that the problems I would ever have would be solved by the people and or the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for over 51 years, every problem I've experienced has been solved by the program and or the people of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the beautiful thing that happened that morning, that I didn't know till later, was the insane belief that I can successfully drink was removed. It's never returned, and I know I didn't do it. I went back to AA that night, and I went back with a different attitude. I wanted everything this program had to offer. Now, when Phil called or sent me a text and asked me to speak up here, I said yes, because I don't say no. But the real reason I'm here tonight is I still want everything this program has to offer. That's the reason I'm here tonight. I went back to AA and I asked Joe to be my sponsor. And the group took me in. And for the first time in my life, I truly belonged somewhere. They gave me a job. I had a job right off the bat. I washed ashtrays. And then they taught me how to make coffee. And when I got sober enough, they let me get up front and read the steps. And they let me read the traditions when they were assured I could pronounce anonymity. And when I got sober enough, they let me chair that meeting. And they started taking me on 12-step calls right off the bat. And right back then, we made a lot of 12-step calls. It was just about every night. We didn't have detox centers. We didn't have halfway houses. The only thing we had was an answering service, telephone answering service. And we went on a 12-step call at 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. It didn't make a difference. Somebody called, we went. And they told me I had to give it away if I wanted to keep it. And so I started chasing drunks. I can tell you a little funny story. Frank Chance took me with him on a 12-step call right off the bat. And we went to see this drunk. And the drunk said, Frank said, "How long you been sober?" And Frank said, 6 years. And he looked over at me and said, "How long you been sober?" And I said, 5 weeks. And he said, "How'd you stay sober 5 weeks?" And Frank said, that's the difference. That can relate to you. And that's the reason we take you with us. But anyway, I started chasing drunks. And I can tell you this much. If you pick up an old drunk at the bus station and he's got everything he owns in an Arkansas suitcase, he belongs to you. And you got to do something with him. He's done his job. And I bought him underwear and socks and motel rooms and a couple of beers to knock the shakes down, whatever it took. Because they told me if I wanted to keep it, I had to give it away. And we had a preacher came into town. He came from Wisconsin. He said God sent him down to open up a halfway house and have a recovery facility with a recovery program. And the only recovery program I ever knew him to have was have prayer in the morning and prayer at meals, but he did a magnificent job with drunks. He rented a great big old house, had a lot of rooms. He'd take a drunk, it didn't matter who they were or where they were from or what condition they were in. And he kept them clean and he kept them clothed and he kept them fed and he gave them a bed to sleep in. And he gave us a place to take drunks. And we picked one up off the street. And he'd take them, it didn't make any difference who they were. Had one guy beat him up one morning, broke his glasses, and he let him back in that night. He's that kind of fella. And all his money came from church contributions. And he called me one night and he said he had a meeting at the church and he thought he might get a contribution. And he said, Rudy was in DTs, and would I come over and sit with Rudy? And I said, sure. Now, Rudy was sort of the town drunk. everybody in town knew Rudy. And before I forget it, let me tell you that Rudy died sober. But I went over and Rudy was laid in a bed. He had a blanket pulled up to his neck, and he was seeing rats or snakes or something. I couldn't see them, but he could see them. And every now and then he'd raise up and point where he was seeing something and scream out. So I got a chair and a fly swatter and sat down beside his bed. And every time he'd scream and point something, I'd take that fly swatter and just hit wherever he was pointing. And whatever he was seeing would go away. And I sat there all night, beat the boogers off of Rudy. And somewhere in the wee hours of the morning, it became important to me that Rudy get well. I was no longer there for my sobriety. I was there to help somebody else get well. First time in my life I ever cared more for somebody else than I did for myself. And not one time since then have I gone out to help a drunk so I can stay sober. I've got my sobriety. I'm sincerely interested in yours. Now, after I'd been sober about 18 months, I decided I wanted to go back on the road selling. I told you I sold school buses, and I knew I could get back. I thought I could get back in the school industry. I knew I couldn't get back in the bus business, but I thought I could get back in the school industry. And there's a big convention up in Atlantic City every year. It's a National School Administrators Conference. It's huge. And they have a big exhibit area. So I got a handful of resumes, and I went up there and I thought I'd call on everybody I knew and those that I didn't, and see if I could get a job back in school industry. And everybody I called on said basically the same thing. And Roy, we don't have anything right now, but if something comes up, we'll certainly consider you. And until I got to this one man, I knew him real well. He ran a school furniture manufacturing plant down in Alabama. And I talked to him a little while. I told him my story, and I told him I was sober and trying to do what was right. And he finally said, Roy, I'm going to be honest with you. He said, your behavior and your drinking has completely ruined your reputation in this industry. I don't know a soul in this building that would give you a job. He said, you say you're sober, and I believe you. But he said, I wouldn't take a chance on you. He said, I think you'd be smart to get into some other industry where you're not known. I think you'll have a better chance at success. Well, it hurt my feelings, made me mad to start with, but on the way home the next day, I realized that the man was right. And looking back on it, he probably did me the greatest favor that could be done. I started looking in other industries. I got in the furniture business. I stayed in it the rest of my working career, and I was successful at it. He did me a good favor. I finally got a job with a man selling furniture hardware, and I worked for him for 5 years. And he kept changing the program every time. It was straight commission, and every time we got to build the territories built up where we could make some money, he'd change the program and knock us back down. And the third time he tried it, I left, just walked away. And I had the opportunity to sit down with this man before he died and say to him, look, I still don't agree with your business practices, and I still feel like you cheated me, but I'll always be grateful to you for giving me a job when nobody else would. I then went to work for another company. I worked for them 20 years. They hired me as a sales rep, and I retired from that company as a Southern District Manager. And it was an awful good operation. And then once I retired, I opened up my own business as a manufacturer's rep. I had some good lines. I sold a lot of stuff to a lot of people. And I ran that till I was 18 more years. I quit at 62 and I opened this business. And when I got 80 years old, I decided it was time to quit and go out and go full time to the golf course. And that's what I did. But when I went back on the road, I promised myself that I was out of town overnight, I'd find an AA meeting to go to. In so doing, I made a lot of meetings. I met a lot of people. I developed a lot of friendships. A lot of them are still in existence. And I've been fortunate. I've been invited to speak at conventions, retreats, and conferences all over this country and Canada. I've met thousands of people. I have a host of friends, as our book says. Life's been good to me. AA has given me back everything that I threw away and destroyed before I came in here and more. I have a good relationship with my children. My wife and I have a great relationship. Life's good. I'm an elder statesman in Alcoholics Anonymous. I sit back and let everybody else do it. And they come to me occasionally with a problem, but I don't try to dominate the thing just because I've been sober a long time. We got a lot of young kids in my group, and they're doing a bang-up job, and I'm tickled to death and love them to death. But there's this old saying, and it says, into every life some rain shall fall. And it's true in my life. It hasn't been all gravy. There's been some bad days. In 1958, I was in the military and stationed in Europe. And that year there was a civil uprising in Lebanon. And the Lebanese government appealed to the United States for assistance, and President Eisenhower sent the military into Beirut. And I was into Lebanon. I was in Beirut in '58. It wasn't pretty. They sent the 11th Airborne and Marines in there to help, and they couldn't get into the city because the rebels had machine guns and snipers on top of a lot of buildings ringing the city. I was with Special Forces, and we were sent in to clear the tops of the buildings. And there was 18 7-man teams sent in, and we killed a lot of people, but we cleared the buildings in 2 days. When I came home, every now and then I'd wake up hearing gunfire. And I realized that it was flashbacks. It didn't happen that often. It didn't bother me that badly, and so I wasn't too upset about it. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and took my 4th and 5th step inventory, I did not put my combat experience down because I couldn't talk about it. I didn't even want to think about it. And a few years later, the nightmares and the flashbacks came back, and they came back with a vengeance. I'd wake up at night hearing gunfire and smelling gunpowder and smelling blood and seeing the faces of the people that I killed. And I was terrified. It was a fear like I've never known. It paralyzed me. I couldn't even think. And I couldn't make the faces go away. I like to drove my poor wife crazy, but I couldn't tell her what was happening. Bryant Bibbers was my sponsor, and Bryant sat me down in a chair and dared me to get up until I told him what was wrong in my life. And for the first time in 30 years, I was able to tell somebody what I did, what we did, and what I saw. And we began to work on fears. And I soon realized that I had never in my life faced a fear. I either ran from them or stuffed them. And Bryant pulled fears out of me like pulling weeds out of a garden. It took us almost a year to get through that. I was finally able to come to terms with the fact that what I did was my job, and what we did saved a lot of American lives. But I still couldn't talk about it. And Bryant died, and I got Tom as a sponsor, and Tom reminded me that he ran over 2 kids and killed them in a blackout. And he said, Roy, it's never going to turn you loose and you start sharing it. And the more you talk about it, the less of a hold it'll have on you. And so I took a chance, and I told a few of my close friends, AA close friends, some of my golf buddies, but I couldn't tell my wife. I tried on many occasions, and at the last minute I'd back out because I didn't know how she could accept what I had to do. And finally I couldn't take it any longer, and I got 2 cups of coffee and I went out in the sunroom and I said, Peggy, come out here, I got to tell you a story. And I told her the whole story, every bloody detail. And when I got through, my wife said, honey, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And I was free. And I'm still free of it. Now, the faces still come back in times of stress or fear, the faces will come back, but they don't haunt me anymore. And I figured out how to make them go away. A few years ago, I had a son who was in a horrible car wreck. They had to tear the car apart to get him out, and they had to airlift him to the hospital. I was 100 miles away. I had to drive that 100 miles, not knowing if my son was dead or alive. And all I could do was pray, God, give me what I need. I don't know what it is I've got to go through, and I don't know what I need. Just give me what I need to get through whatever I got to get through with. Fortunately, he pulled through that. It took a while, but he's alive today. He had a bad head injury, and he's not the same person he was before. It changed his personality, but he's still alive and functioning. A few years ago, I had an 18-year-old grandson, got involved in drugs and alcohol, who lives in Kansas City. And I went out there and I said, Jack, sometimes this disease jumps generations, and you have what I have. And I want you to know that I've lived with it a long time, and so can you. And I called downtown Kansas City to the central office, and I found the groups that the young kids go to. And I said, Jack, go to these meetings, listen to these kids and do what they tell you, and you'll be okay. But Jack wouldn't go back. And a few weeks later, they called us to tell us Jack had hanged himself. Now, through all this pain, I never thought about taking a drink. The thought of a drink never crossed my mind. I'm the same man that sat in that airplane seat all those years ago, wanting to stay sober and could not. And I go through all this pain and all this turmoil, and I don't even think about a drink. What's the difference? The difference is the power of the people in this fellowship. The people who loved me and held me up when I couldn't stand. The difference is the power of the program, the 12 steps. The difference is the power of God as I understand him working in my life. The combination of people, program, and God as I understand him changed me from what I was to what I am today and what I'm capable of becoming tomorrow. That same combination, the people, the program, God as I understand him, and you, the ones of you who have touched my life, have truly made me a grateful alcoholic. Grateful that there's such a thing as Alcoholics Anonymous, and grateful that you allow me to be a part of it. I thank you for that. I love you. God bless you. Merry Christmas.